Welcome to Codex, a history of video games. I'm Mike Coletta.
And I'm Tyler Osby.
And today we are talking again about Final Fantasy. And I think we're going to go into Final Fantasy 11 and 12 today. Oh, wait, no.
Yeah.
11 and 12 is right? Yeah.
11 and 12 today, yep.
I just learned I can't read Roman numerals. Tyler, take it away.
So yeah, we took a nice little break from Final Fantasy. You were finally relieved. You were like, oh gosh, great. I don't have to listen to Tyler talk about Final Fantasy anymore. So we talked about some Star Wars games on the N64, but now we're back. And it's time for some more Final Fantasy because we're still moving through this. We're not done yet. We're on Final Fantasy 11 now.
There's so many Final Fantasies.
There are so many. I was originally going to do 11, 12, and 13 today, but 13's kind of its own little mini-series, and I was like, we got to do it justice, even though nobody liked that game. So we're going to start with 11 today. Do you have an old, fat PS2? Take a look at it. Look at the back of your old, fat PS2 if you have one. If you don't, then just listen and pretend you're doing it. If you're not cool enough to have a network adapter, or you're so cool that you bought yours before they came packaged with the system, you'll notice that there's a rectangle on the back called Expansion Bay. You ever wonder what you can put in there? If you take that cover off and look inside, you'll see it's just about the right size to fit a 3.5-inch hard drive. It's just perfectly sized for that.
What do you do with that hard drive? Or are you getting to that? The mystery's building right now, and I'm so excited.
If you have a network adapter, you'll notice that it has a few extra plugs on it that fit right into that expansion bay, but they don't really plug into anything. Well, if you have a hard drive that can fit in there and it's older, so it's got to be the IDE standard that fell out of fashion in like the mid-2000s, that's where you'd plug a hard drive into your PS2. It fits right onto that network adapter, slides into that expansion bay, and then plugs in where the network adapter plugs into the PS2 on the back in that little expansion port.
Whoa, there's a lot of technical stuff going into this one. I'm excited.
Yeah. So what can a hard drive do in your PS2? It doesn't do much officially, actually. And if you didn't buy the official 40 gigabyte hard drive from Sony, then it officially can't do anything at all. I say officially because, there's some stuff that you can do with a hard drive.
There's a little bit of workarounds.
I'm not going to go into that right now. There's a little bit of workarounds. You can do some stuff. But if you do have that official 40 gigabyte hard drive from Sony, you can do two things. You can transfer save files from your memory card to the hard drive, which is great because it means you don't have to buy a bunch of memory cards. You do still have to use memory cards, but you can at least transfer your files back and forth. And you can play Final Fantasy 11.
Ooh.
There were a few other games in North America that supported the hard drive. Mostly sports games used it for replay features, and there's a couple of SOCOM games that you can download maps to it. So there's a couple other things you can do, but the main thing that you could do with that hard drive is you could play Final Fantasy 11. And in fact, that was such a main draw for buying that hard drive that Final Fantasy 11 came with it. And in fact, you can't do anything with Final Fantasy 11 unless you have the hard drive. So they're two birds of a feather. They come together, and you gotta have them both if you want to play Final Fantasy 11.
Would you say there are two Chocobos that come together?
That's right. There are two Chocobos named Desire, which is strange because they have the same name.
And it's confusing.
And it's confusing, and you call one and the other one comes, and it's a whole thing.
It's like if we were both named Tyler on this podcast, it would be pure chaos all the time.
Oh, man.
So confusing.
We would never have made it 63 episodes in.
Never. Maybe 6.
Maybe 6. That's probably the limit when two podcast hosts have the same name.
Totally. Everyone knows that can't work. You got to get a cool nickname for each other.
That's right. So, Final Fantasy 11, which is my cool nickname for one of those Chocobos. And it's the thing that we care about today. In North America, this game also came packaged with every official Sony hard drive because it was the only game that was required to run it all. I think I already said that, but it's important that we know that.
It's good. It's neat because you could load it.
Yeah, it was neat because you could load it from the hard drive without putting the disc in at all. There are two reasons they weren't worried about piracy. One, if you bought the hard drive, you definitely owned a copy of the game, at least in North America. And two, it was the first Final Fantasy game to be played online, which means it had an account system. You couldn't really pirate this game, so they weren't really worried about people installing it to their hard drive and then getting rid of the disc. Because everybody who owned a hard drive.
I got around to you, Sony. I installed it to my hard drive, and I don't have an account, and now I got to uninstall it from my hard drive.
Now I have to pay you for an account. Sony's like, give me all the money. So, like I said, Final Fantasy XI is an MMORPG, massively multiplayer online role-playing game.
A Memorpaga?
A Memorpaga, indeed. It eschews the trappings of older Final Fantasy games, which were strictly single-player affairs, and turns that around on its head into being the most multiplayer that a game can be. There are literally thousands of people playing at any given moment.
It's massive multiplayer. The only way it could be more multiplayer is if it was massively multiplayer.
Yeah.
an MMORPG, which is what the Jaybird Championship Series will be. You're welcome.
That's right. The Intergalactic Jaybird Championships.
That's right.
So, development on Final Fantasy XI started in November of 1999 after the release of the very popular, for the time, massively multiplayer online role-playing game called EverQuest.
Did you ever play EverQuest?
No, not really. That's a topic for another episode. I would love to dig into some EverQuest because I think there's a lot of really cool history going on there. And that game has like 20 expansion packs, and they're still making new content for it.
People still play it, right?
Yeah, even though there's an EverQuest 2 that I think is dead, the first one is not, at least. Maybe the second one is still. But yeah, that's all I know about EverQuest, really. Except that EverQuest 2 had the /pizza command that allowed you to order pizza, and it was like really cool in 2004.
That is really cool. I mean, I think it's cool in 2019, personally.
Yeah, they partnered with Domino's, and they were like, we're going to bring some pizzas to your house. Oh, podcast producer Toby has
he heard pizza.
Joined me here.
He heard pizza, and he got really stoked. And
he decided to join me. Yep.
Pizza Cat.
That's right. So EverQuest set the foundation for a lot of how future MMOs would be designed, at least until World of Warcraft would come along and sort of really revolutionize it. But after the success of EverQuest, though, it was pretty clear that there was a market there that was not tapped yet. It was very attractive to a publisher for a few reasons. One, you make a game that people buy once, and then they continue paying for month after month as you add new content. That sounds really great. Adding new content to a game is cheaper and easier than building a whole new game from scratch, so having a regularly updated game bring in a reliable amount of money every month was something that was very appealing to publishers at the time. And I would say it's still appealing, although games in this sense have turned into what's called games as a service, and a lot of times they're free to play with other ways of spending money in the game. But that's not how the industry worked in the early 2000s. So Final Fantasy XI would get in on this a little bit before the MMO gold rush that WoW would kick off. So World of Warcraft came in, and then it was very clear, holy moly, everybody's got to make an MMORPG. But for now, we just have EverQuest and Final Fantasy XI and a few others, other MMOs. I'd love to do like a history of MMOs.
That would be very interesting. I was actually just thinking that.
So maybe we'll do that in the future. The team that developed Chrono Cross for the original PlayStation was assigned to work on Final Fantasy XI as soon as the localization for Chrono Cross was done.
Question.
It took them almost... Yes.
Is Chrono Cross related to Chrono Trigger?
Yes, it is. It's a sequel.
Oh, good. I called that. Nailed it. Look at me being the history expert just off of intuition.
Got 'em.
Feeling it.
Yeah. So it took them almost exactly 3 years to develop and release Final Fantasy XI. At first, they planned a simultaneous launch in North America and Japan, but ultimately they had to scrap it, and the North America version would come nearly a year after its Japanese counterpart, and it came with the first expansion that because it took a whole year. And so in the meantime, they released an expansion pack in Japan, so when they launched it in North America, they were like, yeah, we'll give you the expansion pack too.
No, I think that's a good way. I mean, that makes it so the North American crowd didn't feel too left out.
Yeah,
I like that.
That was nice. There was a problem when the game first came out that people were complaining about, that because you could play with Japanese players, and it was like all the North American players came in, and the Japanese players were so far ahead that it was like really frustrating for North American players. So they had to make a whole bunch of new servers for North American players to play on, where there wasn't like a million other people who had finished the game.
Was there like a PvP portion where people would murder you?
I don't think so. I never played too much PvP when I played this game. So,
but you did play this game.
I did play this game.
Oh, we're gonna
briefly.
get a little insight into the past.
A little bit, yeah. If they did add PvP, I think it was a little bit later on.
Yeah, I feel like that probably wasn't as popular. Like now, if you get an MMO and you don't have PvP, people complain. But I bet you back then it was so new that people didn't really know what was going on.
Yeah, and PvP at the time was less of a structured thing the way it is in later games. It was usually more of a like, oh, I came across somebody in the world and I just killed them because I can do that. Which is kind of how World of Warcraft is now, but World of Warcraft really has like a structured, like, we're going to get into a match, we're going to play against other players.
Yeah, not to talk too much about other MMOs, but I played RuneScape as my first MMO when I was in like 7th or 8th. No, I would say like 9th or 10th grade. And this is the first game I got scammed on, so there you go. I lost my Mithril Longsword. I think I mentioned that before. But I remember the wilderness being like the scary part of the game, because if you go up there, you can get killed by other players. So I was like, ooh, don't go in the wilderness. Ooh, yeah.
Yeah, you had to sort of opt into PvP.
Yeah.
Which is how PvP is nowadays too. Like World of Warcraft has the war mode where you can choose to be in like PvP mode where you choose to be killable.
I think a lot of a lot of MMOs are like, because I remember when Grand Theft Auto Online came out, that was a catastrophe with like people griefing
but it's
and like
really
murdering.
popular now.
Oh no, they just came out with a brand new expansion, I guess, like a casino expansion. I heard about it on a podcast of all places.
Yeah, that's a game that I don't hear a whole lot about, but it is apparently extremely popular and extremely lucrative for Rockstar. Like they make so much money off of GTA Online.
Oh yeah, actually, and when I say I heard it on a podcast, it wasn't a podcast about video games. It was completely off topic, and they did a commercial, like an ad read for Grand Theft Auto Online, which I thought was really strange that you have like an ad read about Grand Theft Auto Online on like it was stuff you should know on that podcast. I was like, this is a weird fit, but there are a lot of people that listen to this, so maybe people have played the game before. I don't know.
Weird flex, but okay.
Yeah, I know. I mean, it's cool. I didn't play a lot of Grand Theft Auto Online. I kind of started early and then I just kind of dropped off. But yeah, it is. There are people that have a car show culture on Grand Theft Auto Online. Like they collect and show their cars on servers like you would in real life, but they're video game cars. Yeah, it's crazy.
Huh. It must require like a lot of work to get those cars. Like that's why it would be exciting
I think
show them off, I guess.
A lot of in-game cash.
Yeah. There's also a whole like subculture of people that they do like role playing on Grand Theft Auto Online. And they like have a server to themselves and it will be like, well, I'm a police officer on this server. And like they go around just doing police officer stuff. There's a whole Twitch subculture you can watch people role play and they get real serious about it. It is kind of cool. It's like interesting to watch because of how into it they get.
Yeah. It's like, I get really interested about LARPing. I would never LARP myself, I don't think. But I watch a lot of documentaries about it because I find it so like interesting that people want to just be someone else for a weekend, you know?
Yeah, that's crazy.
Sorry, back to the
Final
topic.
Fantasy. One of the things that was truly remarkable about Final Fantasy XI, though, was how cross-platform it was. So it came out first on PC, I believe this is the first Final Fantasy game to be released first on PC. And it also had a PS2 release, because we talked about all the hard drive stuff. The coolest thing, though, was that the PS2 players could play with the PC players, and it was the exact same game. PS2 was kind of at a little bit of a disadvantage without a keyboard, although if you were a true self-respecting Final Fantasy XI player on PS2, you definitely had a USB keyboard to type to other people. But otherwise, the game was all exactly the same. It had better graphics on PC, the general PC advantages, but like you could party up with people on PS2 and PC. You could tackle dungeons together, do quests together, do whatever. All of the Final Fantasy stuff you could do together. It was the first MMO to offer cross-platform play in this way, and they would expand upon it in 2006 when they put the game out on the Xbox 360. So you could play PS2 players with PC players with Xbox 360 players, and PS3 could get in on the action too. It didn't get its own port of the game, so it wasn't like an enhanced PS3 version the way they enhanced it for the 360. But you could, if you had a PS3 that was backward compatible with PS2 games, you could play the game on your PS3.
That's really... Version. So wait, you could play on Xbox 360 with someone on PlayStation 2?
Yep.
Wow. That is...
Yeah, and
business-wise.
A fun fact about Xbox Live and Final Fantasy XI, you did not have to have an Xbox Live Gold subscription to play Final Fantasy XI online because it had its own fee attached to it. That you had to pay like a monthly fee, $12.99 or $14.99. So if you only wanted to play Final Fantasy XI on your 360, you did not have to buy Xbox Live Gold. And that carries over from when Phantasy Star Online was on the original Xbox because it had its own monthly fee. Microsoft was like, you don't have to pay for Xbox Live if you want to play this game online because it has its
really
own
cool
fee.
of them because that would kill a game. If you had to pay two subscription fees, there's no way.
Yeah. Because these games also have a way of being like your only game. Like there are a lot of people that will play Phantasy Star or Final Fantasy 11, and it's the only game they play. And so they don't really want to pay for an Xbox Live Gold subscription if this is the only game they're going to play. And if they have to already pay a subscription, they're not trying to pay two subscription fees to play one game, you know?
Yeah, totally. That makes a lot of sense.
Yep. So... That's pretty cool. I think it's interesting how cross-platform it is, and Final Fantasy XIV would sort of continue that with PS3, PS4, and PC players all being able to play together. Although that's not true anymore. I think they dropped support for the PS3 a couple of years ago, but it was true at the time. The gameplay. of Final Fantasy XI, though, is super different from past Final Fantasies because it's 100% real-time combat. It's pretty slow, though, because it's online and everything has to sync up. It's still menu-driven like previous Final Fantasies, but players had the option of like creating macros for their skills that they could hit quickly from their keyboard if they wanted to take the extra time to set that up. But the game was really built around like navigating through these menus. And if you played on PC, it was pretty apparent that playing with a controller was the way to go just because of the way the game was designed. It was definitely like controller first, mouse and keyboard second. But unlike a lot of MMOs at the time, this game had a very clear storyline that you could follow. One of the ways in which this game broke off from previous entries was its player character. Normally, in a Final Fantasy game, the player takes control of a character in the game that already exists and has already been created for them. There's no real customization in how the character looks or acts. You often have control over how they advance, but the character themselves is a character unto themselves, and the player is just sort of controlling them. Their role playing is that character. But in Final Fantasy XI, since everyone is playing at the same time, everybody made their own character, choosing from several different races, and like you picked your class and all that kind of stuff. And actually, speaking of classes, we'll get to that in a minute. But I just thought that's really interesting compared to all of the other Final Fantasy games. You create your own character here, and you really are that character.
Yeah.
As opposed to playing through the story differently.
That throws everything off from the old Final Fantasy, like, I don't know what you call it, like formula, you know?
Yeah.
Do you remember what the races were? Were they like fantasy, were like elves and stuff, or was it different? Was it like
they're I'll Google it right now, but let's see if I can name them all off the top of my head. There was Humes, which are like humans. There are the Elvins, which are like elves. You got your Tarus, which is little small little, not gnomes, but they're like little cute things. You got Galkas, which are like big, strong, beastie things. I think Mithra are in that game. They're like cat people.
You gotta have kitty cat people. You can't have no kitty cat people in a Final Fantasy game.
Yeah, and I think they're all the cat people are female. Yeah, that's it. Those are the 5 races: Hume, Elvin, Tarutaru, Galka, and Mithra. Yes, I nailed it.
You really got it. You're really showing your professionalism in this podcast today, and I'm loving it. All right,
that's just pulled straight off the dome.
Right off the dome.
Yeah, I really liked the idea of this game, and I'll talk about it a little bit. But what I want to talk about now is the job system. So you may recall when we talked about Final Fantasy III and Final Fantasy V, we talked about the job system, and also in Final Fantasy Tactics. But we'll talk about that game later.
I remember you loved it, right? You love jobs.
I love job systems, and Final Fantasy XI has a job system. And this is still one of the more novel ways I think it differed from other entries in the MMO genre. Normally in an MMO, you pick your character, so you make your character, you pick a race, and you pick a class, and that character is that class forever and for always. And if you want to try a different class, you got to make a new character. In Final Fantasy XI, you could be all of the classes or all of the jobs on the same character. So the player can change their job at any time they wanted to just by visiting their Mog home in one of the game's main cities. And they just had to change, like you just went into a menu there and you changed your job. All of the jobs leveled up individually. So it was sort of like starting over if you picked a different job, but you got to keep your same character, and it really felt like you were just like making a career change almost, but you could change back and forth anytime. So if you wanted to play as something else real quick, it was easy to just switch and then switch back. So I think that's really neat, and one of the cool ways that 11 helps you get attached to your character specifically. Rather than like in World of Warcraft, where if you're like, well, sometimes I play as a warlock or sometimes I play as a priest, you have to like make different characters for that, and you don't get quite as attached to those characters, I don't think.
Yeah.
And I'm not a fan of making a million characters because it always feels like starting over from scratch every time. And the way they did it in 11 felt like you were just taking a side step or like a side journey into another class that maybe it would become your main class, but it didn't feel like you were starting over. So
that's my personal beef with MMOs. Is that you commit to something and then you look up online or you get beat by someone that's a different thing, and then you feel like you can't change. And if they do offer like a respec system, it costs like either in-game currency that's a lot, or you actually have to pay for it with real money, which just bums me out so hard. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I love being able to try out these new play styles. So that was really appealing to me, and one of the reasons I wanted to pick this game up when I was a teenager. So the job system also allowed for support jobs, which was really cool. So basically you pick a main job and you level that up. And then at a certain point, you'd get access to a support job, which is any of the 23 other jobs. So I should have mentioned that earlier. There are 23 total jobs in the game now. You get access to nearly all of the skills from that job with one catch. That job could only be half the level of your main job. So it would lead to some really interesting combinations, and it's something I still kind of wish other MMOs would do. Like, a lot of times they'll have like cross-class specs or things like that. Like Final Fantasy XIV used to have skills that you could pull from other classes depending on if they're the same kind. But it's not, it's a little bit different now. But I just really like that of like being able to be a black mage that has a lot of white mage skills, or a red mage with a lot of warrior skills, or something like that, which was really neat, really cool to me.
Yeah.
The world of Final Fantasy XI was called Vana'diel. And like all numbered Final Fantasies before it, completely unrelated to any other Final Fantasy game.
That's the way it should be.
That's right.
You've been going on a streak for so long.
There's a storyline to go through, like I said. What's that?
Oh, they've been going on this streak for so long. They can't connect. Can't do it.
Can't. So there's a storyline to go through, like I said before. I don't know a whole lot about it, and it's been ongoing for over a decade now, so I don't want to even try to scratch the surface of it. I've seen that there are some people that consider the Chains of Promethea expansion pack to be the best story in all of Final Fantasy, so make of that what you will. I kind of wish that Square would make like a single player version of this to roll through, just so I can see all the storylines and stuff like that, but it's super long now because each expansion pack is probably the length of a traditional Final Fantasy game. So there's 5 of them also. That's 5 expansion packs.
Long.
So that's 5 games to play through if you want to see all of the story. Like I said before, Rise of the Zillart expansion pack was released a little while after the Japanese launch, but it was included with every copy of the main game in other regions when the game was released there. After that, they released the aforementioned Chains of Promethea, followed by Treasures of Ot-Urgen, Wings of the Goddess, and Seekers of Adolin. They don't continue to release expansion packs, but the game is still running and actually has a lot of players playing it. They've raised the level cap to 99, and there's just a whole bunch of people still playing the game, which I find fascinating.
That is so many people to play.
Yeah.
For that long. Because what is this? Yeah, it's been like 20 years, right?
Nearly.
I mean, close, I guess.
Yeah, it's been 2003. So, yeah, okay, yeah, I guess
16
we're
years.
getting there.
Yeah.
15, 16 years. So, yeah. So, like I said, the development on this title is definitely wound down after all that time. But Square has announced a partnership with a company called Nexon to bring the game to mobile phones. We don't really know a whole lot about this, but I'll be checking it out for sure. It'll probably be free to play. If my pessimistic side wants to say it's just going to be full of pay-to-win garbage. But I'll check it out, because I love this game. I have fond memories of it.
Isn't it depressing that in general, if you give us a mobile game and you play any sort of other type of video game, you're just going to automatically assume it is pay-to-win garbage?
Yeah, which is really too bad, because there's nothing about the mobile platform that requires that. Like, phones are very powerful hardware. You can get controllers for them. Like, you can put real games on a phone, but for some reason when people hear like Diablo Mobile, they go, it's just a garbage pay-to-win piece of crap.
Totally.
Man, that really is.
What you've been playing today is a phone game, and I'm going to talk about it later. Yeah, so it's going to be.
Can't wait to hear about it.
Yeah, it's going to be a little teaser till about 20 minutes from now.
All right. So this game was my first real MMO. I'm not really counting RuneScape in this, although maybe I should. I hate to say that RuneScape is not a real MMO, but it was my first like subscription MMO that relied on that sort of like you had a controller. It was like a full game, not in a web browser. What?
Did you hear that noise just now? That was the sound of all our RuneScape fan listeners lighting their torches at the same time, ready to burn our podcast to the ground. Because you didn't call it a
Send
real
us an
MMO.
email and we'll do an episode on RuneScape. Like I said, I don't mean to say RuneScape is not a real MMO, but it's a browser game. There is definitely a bit of a stigma attached to it. So when I say first real MMO, it's the first MMO. Here we go. It's the first MMO that I paid for the box on and also paid a subscription fee for.
There you go. I actually would like to I will tackle the RuneScape history. I feel like if you want to do the EverQuest history, I will tackle the RuneScape one, because that's another one that's like... We
can do a whole series on MMOs.
Oh, yeah. And do an MMO each time? Let's do that. That'll be fun.
If you have a favorite MMO that you'd like us to cover, send us an email, codexhistorypodcast@gmail.com.
Solid plug. Sorry, you can continue. I didn't mean to interrupt.
So my brother and I picked this game up for our PS2 in about 2004, because at the time we were on a huge Final Fantasy kick, and that was the newest one at the time. So I personally was also interested in the hard drive add-on because I'm a nerd who loves like that kind of technology that gets added to consoles. So what we were prepared to play for the first 30 days of the subscription, but I don't think we had any sort of plan for how we'd continue to pay for it since we were kids with no jobs. And I know my mom was definitely not about to pay a subscription fee for us, though she did generously let us use her credit card to sign up because I think you still needed a card to sign up.
That's
we had a
cool,
ton
Mom.
of fun playing this game. We each made our own characters. We didn't really understand the concept of it, I think, because we knew it was massively multiplayer. Like we knew conceptually what that meant, that we'd be playing online with other people, but we never really thought to try to figure out a way for us to play together. We used to take turns and watch each other play this MMO, but we never played it together. I think that because that would have required 2 PS2s, 2 TVs, 2 copies of the game, and 2 subscription fees, and we knew that was just way out of the question. So we did what we could. We never thought about that. So we tried to take turns and watch each other and get as far as we could. We grouped up for experience parties. Man, experience parties were such a drag.
What's
like
that?
What you would do, you would go into the game. You're like, I want to level up because for reasons I want to level up to do my next quest or I want to get a new skill or whatever. What you do is you have to get a party together to go out and kill monsters because after you get a little ways out into the desert, the monsters are unkillable if you're by yourself. And that's where all the good experience points were. So once you had killed all the easy stuff over and over, like at a certain point, you stop getting meaningful amounts of experience. So you need to go kill these bigger monsters that you'd need a group for. So you would go into the town, you'd go into like the party finder thing, and you'd try to look for a team to get yourself all together. There's no real teleporting in this game. I mean, there was teleporting, but the fast travel was like from large city to large city. So if you needed to go a ways out into the wilderness, to fight whatever you wanted to fight, there was no like fast getting there. So you'd spend like an hour getting a party together. And then you'd spend like half an hour walking to the area of the desert or whatever that you wanted to build XP in. And then you would spend some time like ganging up on these monsters to get the experience points, building up the experience chains. And that was a little bit fun. But then inevitably at some point, somebody's going to mess up. You're going to die. You're going to have to wait for either somebody to come res you or to go back to the town and then walk all the way back out. And it was just like, everything just took so long. And then even then, when you're grinding these monsters down, it was a slow process that was going to make you level very slowly.
Do they still do an XP penalty when you die? Is that still a part of the game? Because
that's a good question. I don't know.
One side, I'm like, ruthless. Wow, developer, ruthless. But on another side, I'm like, there's no better way to encourage teamwork play than making it so you have to team up with someone. Otherwise, you will die, and otherwise, you will lose XP.
Yeah.
I also like that they're making XP the currency of the game. Like, that's the most important thing. Not gold or items. XP. That's what it should be.
XP was very important, and you could level down too. So like you lost, so you needed a certain amount of XP to get to your next level. When you died, you lost 10% of whatever that number was. So if you had less than 10% of your next level, you would level down, and it was very frustrating.
Wow, that is so frustrating. Ruthless, even, I would say.
Yeah, especially if that was a level where you like got a new skill or something, because you would level down and then you couldn't use that skill anymore. It's so frustrating.
Yikes!
It's the kind of game that like, man, I played it back in the day. I would definitely not want to play it today because it did not respect the player's time in that sense. It's probably a lot different now. I think it's much easier to solo things in FF11. I think it's like leveling is just a faster experience in general. Like they have made a lot of changes over the last 15 years, but at the time when I was playing it, man, it was rough. So
yeah, ruthless game. Dude. It's funny because like looking from the side, I'm like, I respect the ruthlessness of that game, but at the same time, I'm in the same boat with you. Where I was like, if I was playing that game, I would be furious if I lost like a level. I'd be so mad.
Yeah, we put it down probably after a couple of weeks, so we never really ended up paying a subscription fee for it. We did fire it back up a couple of years later. We both picked up copies of it on PC, and we played the 30-day trial on PC also. It's a much better experience on PC, and this was a couple of years later, so they had changed a lot of stuff too. I lost interest in it pretty quick, but my brother played with his friend for a pretty long time.
That's cool,
Yeah, but what's cool about that game is it really laid the groundwork for Final Fantasy XIV, which is the second MMO in the series, and we'll get to that a bit later, but that's the game, when we get to what you've been playing, that's all I've been playing is Final Fantasy XIV. So they learned their lesson from 11, and they made such a better game in 14.
That's good to
now,
hear.
I would like to move on to Final Fantasy 12.
Ooh.
So, yeah. Since Final Fantasy VII, there was a new Final Fantasy release every 2 years or less. So we had 7 in 1997, 8 in 1999, 9 in 2000, 10 in 2001, 11 in 2003. But we waited 3 years for Final Fantasy XII, which was the second single-player entry in the series to be on the PlayStation 2. Development on 12 started in late 2000, shortly after the release of 9 and before the release of 10 and 11. So they had 10, 11, and 12 all in development at the same time. So they were really starting to get ahead of the game on these Final Fantasy games. I think that's probably because before 11 was confirmed to be called 11, there was some contention over whether they wanted to consider it a mainline entry in the series or if they wanted to spin it off and just call it like Final Fantasy Online. So I think Square wanted to make sure there wasn't too much time in between numbered entries in the series. So they got a lot of time on Final Fantasy 12. It took about 5 years total of development time, I think. So wow. That's crazy.
Yeah, really putting the hours in, though. I mean, if you think about it, though, because from their standpoint, they're like, well, Final Fantasy 11's for PlayStation 2, but it's not really a Final Fantasy game. So do you think maybe they were just like, and this is all speculation, that they're like, well, we got to really put the time in for 12 then, to make it really good? Because that could break a series if you have a bad entry like that.
For sure. And 11 was very profitable like the whole time because it was a subscription fee game, so it was still bringing in regular money. Actually, as of 2012, they actually announced that 11 was, at least at that point in time, the most profitable Final Fantasy game to date. So they could kind of coast on that and take a long time putting a lot of effort into making a really good follow-up for the series.
Yeah, definitely.
So development was headed by the director of Final Fantasy Tactics, Yasumi Matsuno, and the director of Final Fantasy IX, Hiroyuki Ito. Matsuno actually did have to leave the game a year before its release, but I can't help but think that the decision to set the world in Ivalice, which is the same setting from Tactics, was influenced by him. And like I said before, we'll get to Tactics another time. I do want to talk about that game, but it's not a mainline Final Fantasy, so we're not on it yet. This was the first Final Fantasy to be set in the same world as another entry in the series. Like I said, it's set in Ivalice, the same setting from Tactics. So unless you count 10 and 7 having some very loose ties, in 10-2, there's like a kind of a throwaway line from one of the characters that makes you think, oh, man, maybe 10 and 7 are like in the same world, but just like millennia apart.
Yeah. Is that the first time they're in the same world with another game? Is this the first time that happened? Ooh.
Yeah. It's all different characters. I think it takes place in a completely different time period, so they don't have that much of an effect on each other, but some of the locations are probably similar and like some of the ideas of it and the art styles and stuff. So the world of Ivalice is inspired by like a lot of different cultures from around the world, but especially Mediterranean and Middle Eastern cultures. So you can see that in the architecture and the writing choices the team made when building the game. It definitely feels that way. The plot follows yet another ragtag group of misfits out to save the world. I don't want to give too much away because it's a very political story, and it starts out with one of the characters, Princess Ash, having recently wed a prince from another country, uniting those countries and delaying war between them. And then a couple of years later, the main character, Vaan, that's Vaan with 2 A's, he discovers some magicite. After breaking into that palace, he gets caught by 2 other sky pirates who are like, man, I was trying to get that magicite, and they set off on an adventure. Princess Ash joins them for reasons. Like I said, there's a lot more to the story, but it gets really, really political, and it's hard to kind of explain without knowing the backstories of all the different factions and stuff, and I don't really want to dive too far into that.
Yeah, we don't need to get all super duper into it, I think.
Yeah, it has a lot of the same trappings as a standard Final Fantasy story, but it's all wrapped up in this larger narrative between the countries and their relationships. It's kind of like Game of Thrones, but less violence and more chocobos.
If you told me there was a TV show that was like Game of Thrones with less violence and more chocobos, I would watch it.
I would also watch that
easily.
TV show.
Gosh, I love chocobos.
Which is why I'm very excited to get back into 12. I got about 10 hours into 12 like a year ago and got stuck on a boss, and now I want to get back into it.
You might mention this later, but is there a good version to play 12 on now, or do you just need to get that old disc?
I will talk about that in a little bit. Yes, there is definitely a best way to play it, and it is not the PS2 version.
Oh, okay.
So the battle system changes a big time from Final Fantasy X, they called it Active Dimension Battle. It's much more real time and actually on its surface looks very similar to Final Fantasy XI. There's no random battles. All the enemies are on the map and they're fought in real time without like transitioning to a battle sequence. You can control one of the character's movements in the fight, and then the ATB system kind of governs how often you're able to use your attacks. So it's all real time, so you only get to control one character in battle. So like controlling more than one would be challenging, although you can, because you can pause the game and move between characters. So if you wanted to control everybody, you could, but the real magic in this game rests on the party's AI and their abilities to perform and help out. So while the AI plays for all the other people in your party, in lots of other games, you wouldn't really be given a whole lot of control over what they do. Maybe you could set priorities for them. But in Final Fantasy XII, you get to use the Gambit system, which is really incredible, if you ask me. So the Gambit system allows the player to set up complicated, like if-then statements for how their party members should act. And there are like tons of options. Like there's, if a party member drops below 30% health, do this thing, where like this thing can be anything you want. So like use a healing item or do something else. So like, oh, if they get blind, use this deblinding item. I can't remember what the deblinding item is called. Golden needle, maybe? No, that's for stone. And then, so like you could have your party members like automatically do things, which is really fun. I think to someone watching the game, it's actually kind of boring because once you get really good at the Gambit system, the game literally just plays itself. You could just like walk into a battle and everything will happen the way you want it to. And I think it's really satisfying to learn the Gambit system and be able to do that. But for folks watching the game, it probably looks pretty lame. Like you just walked in and everything died.
Or you're just really good at the game.
That's right.
People
That's
should
exactly
be
what
happy
it means.
for you. If your friend isn't
When
supportive of your Gambit system, you need to find a new friend. I'm going to say that right now.
Yep. That's right. When that happens, you are very good at the game. So I loved it. But I could understand that, man, I just want to play this game again. Okay. So the progression system in Final Fantasy XII builds a bit on Final Fantasy X's sphere grid by introducing the license board. So instead of moving on a fixed track with a few meaningful choices, I think people will look at the sphere grid and go, wow, so many choices here. If you unfold the sphere grid, you realize that there's actually not a whole lot of choices. There's just a lot of things on it. But the license board is truly like a free skill tree. So you move around the license board acquiring licenses to use certain abilities and stat boosts. And then every time you activate a square on the license board, the squares adjacent to it become available for activation the next time you're able to activate squares. And you gain experience through fighting baddies, and then you use those on the license board to get better. It was really neat. And every character had their own license board. In later re-releases called the Zodiac Job System, and this is how it is in the Zodiac Age HD remakes for the PC, PS4, and Switch. Each character would be given the choice of choosing 2 traditional Final Fantasy jobs, and then the license board would correspond to that job. And there's like probably 15 different jobs to choose from, which is pretty cool.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, man. I really love this game.
I can tell. I can tell just in your voice right now. You're like, oh, man. I can see some regret and excitement in your voice.
That's right. Final Fantasy XII was released in 2006. So it was released in March for Japan and then October for North America. And then it wouldn't be until February when it hit Europe, almost a whole year after the Japanese release. Metacritic has this game at a 92, putting it squarely into their must-play territory. It was also the first Final Fantasy game to get a perfect score from the Japanese magazine Famitsu, which is a very prestigious video gaming magazine in Japan. And that was only the 6th game overall to get a perfect score from that magazine. And that magazine had been around for a while, even at that point in time. And the game sold really well, too. 1,764,000 copies in its first week in Japan alone, which was almost as many as Final Fantasy X had sold over its entire lifetime up to that point, which is crazy.
Dude.
It also... What?
I'm like reading this, and you know what? You had real 2 banger games today. Like, if you think about it, Final Fantasy 11, Final Fantasy 2. If you're a Final Fantasy fan, like, this must have been an amazing time period for you. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You had to wait, obviously, for 3 years. But you could be playing 11 while you wait for 12.
And there was a lot of content in 11, so you had plenty of things to do in that game.
Love it.
So, yeah. It also won a ton of awards. I don't want to dig into every single one of them here, but the game did pretty well, okay? Critics thought it worked good. Players thought it worked good. It sold well, which is kind of weird to me because I remember it being one of the more frowned upon entries in the series at the time. I think maybe it's because this was like at a time my friends and I were like 16, 17 years old when it came out. And we were kind of starting into that phase where like everything new is bad. And man, it's all about the classics. Like that's weird nostalgia that people close to finishing high school get about their childhoods.
Oh, yeah.
Like, oh, it's all about Final Fantasy VII.
Yeah. I think
being an edgelord.
You shouldn't listen to 16 to 17-year-olds about video games for anything.
No,
that's what I'm going to say.
I fully agree with that.
Yeah, take that. Fortnite, looking at you, huh? Coming at you. Just kidding. You seem actually kind of nice and fun, but never really got into it.
Yeah.
We played a couple.
Right. Yeah, we played a few. I was into it for a little while. I enjoyed it. I don't know. It didn't speak to me the way it speaks to the youth of today, and that's fine. You know, people are allowed to like what they like, and I can't. It will be weird for me when the Fortnite nostalgia posts come out the same way that like Minecraft. People are like weirdly nostalgic for Minecraft now. Not weirdly. It makes total sense that they would be nostalgic for Minecraft. It just makes me feel old because I was old even when that game came out.
Yeah, like when people start posting about it the same way we talk about like the original Smash Brothers or like Pokemon Red and Blue or like even like the first Tony Hawk's Pro Skater games, that's going to be a weird time. You know, when you see it all come full circle.
Yeah, like when we talk about like, man, it was so fun to come home from school and play Zelda Ocarina of Time. Man, what good old days. And now people are like, man, I couldn't wait to come home from school and play Minecraft. And I was like, whoa, man, I was way out of school when Minecraft came out.
Yeah, like, I think, well, no, actually, I was in college when because I bought Minecraft when I was in the alpha. Like, for some reason, I just caught it right when it came out, and I somehow found out about it. And because I could play it on my old crappy PC. That was what because I had
really
a
cool about
really
it.
Old PC, and I'm like, oh, I can play this game pretty well on it. And then my PC broke, and I stopped playing. But I got a new PC, and everything worked out fine.
Yeah. Anyway, my personal anecdote for how well Final Fantasy XII was received does not match up to apparently how well it actually was, which is great because I really like that game. Coming back to it years later because I didn't play it when it first came out, even though I was super stoked for it. Yeah, that's strange. My brother played it. So like we kind of had a division system where we would like one of us would play a Final Fantasy game, the other would play other ones. So we didn't really play the same ones. So he played 12.
I mean, your brother is the king of the JRPG. So
that's true, but he didn't finish this game back in the day. But I think he did finish it just a few weeks ago on the Switch, which brings me to the best way to play Final Fantasy XII. For a long time, the game was only on the PlayStation 2, but a couple of years ago, they released Final Fantasy XII: The Zodiac Age, which was a HD remake of the game. They put it out on PS4 first, and then about a year later, they put it out on PC, and then probably 6 months to a year after that, they put it out on the Nintendo Switch. They did that all with a long enough time in between them that I bought the PS4 version, didn't play it. When it came out on PC, I was like, oh, this is clearly the better way to play it. Bought it, played it for about 10 hours, and then I was like, man, I'm going to put this down for now. And then it came out on Switch, just in time for me to go, oh, yeah, I really want to play that game again. I should play it on Switch so I can play it portably. So I bought it for Switch also, and I still haven't played it.
Oh, man, the backlog of games is growing.
I have bought this game so many times. I've bought it almost as many times as I bought Final Fantasy X.
You are the ultimate consumer of Final Fantasy games to them. They should have a plaque for you. They're like, this guy buys all the copies of her games and then doesn't play them, and he keeps just buying copies.
I'm the reason they keep re-releasing these games because I buy them and then don't play them.
They should send you a Chocobo. You know,
oh man,
just
that would be great.
Out of care, you know, because they know.
So anyway, the best way to play this game is to play the either the PC version because it runs at 60 frames per second and has a 4x speed boost, which is really nice for all that XP grinding, or the Switch version because it's portable and plays really well there. Also, so like I said, with the international job system, that's in the Zodiac Age. So the progression system's a little bit better than the original game. And on the Nintendo Switch, you get the ability to respec anytime you want. So you can like get back all of your experience points and like choose different jobs and different paths on the license board. I think pretty much whenever you want on the Switch, which is really nice. And one of those like quality of life things that is just like, oh, I don't have to worry about making terrible mistakes early on in the game when I don't know how to play that I can't undo later on. I can just undo it all and then reallocate my points, which I am a big fan of in games now as a person who doesn't have a whole lot of time or I don't have the patience to like replay a game just because I messed up on some stat thing. I would much rather just make that decision again. Like just give me all my stat points back and I'll just reallocate them. So
yeah, nice.
I'm excited about that.
Well, that is.
And I really want to play
awesome.
this game now.
Dude, I'm excited for you. I'm amped now for you. That's how I feel right now.
You're what?
I'm amped for you right now. That's how.
Oh man,
That's how excited I am. I want to hear the
appreciate that.
progress, and I'm sure the listener does too. I want to hear the progress of this.
Well, maybe I'll jump back into it.
Ooh.
But if you want to talk about Final Fantasies that weren't very well received, then we need to dive into Final Fantasy 13. But that is a story for another time. Mike, what you been playing?
Oh, so today my video game consumption has gone down, unfortunately. I played a little bit of Destiny, and then I
Good.
played a little bit of Inside, and I got stuck. So last night,
no.
unfortunately. And then, so I dropped my phone into the lake last week. It's a long story, everybody, but my phone is gone. So I got a new phone, and it happens to be an iPhone XR, so I can play all these games that I couldn't play before because of the.
Oh, nice.
I was on a 6.
Oh, yeah, because you're upgrading from a 6.
That's right. So I do this like every 3 or 4 years. I finally upgrade to the newest thing, and I'm like, whoa, technology's crazy. So I started playing the Elder Scrolls Blades. Have you ever heard of this?
Is that cool? I have. I played it briefly, and then I saw all the stories online that was like, it's pay to win garbage, burp, 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 burp. And I was like, oh, well, write it off as another crappy mobile game.
Yeah, so
but is it good?
It's maybe pay to win garbage eventually, but I'm playing it right now and just doing the story quests like to set up the town. And I'm not spending any money, and I'm having a good time. And I'm sure from what my friend described, he's like, you're just going to hit a point where you're done with it. And I'm like, I'm sure that's going to happen. But for now, if you play it for free, what's the harm? You know, it's just more Elder Scrolls.
Hey, as long as you don't reward them for their crappy garbage, then,
exactly.
it's fine.
And I'm hoping that eventually what will happen, because it is technically a beta, it says, as you're playing it, it says beta. So my hope is that they're kind of learning from these mistakes, and when the game does come out, it'll be a little bit better.
Yeah, I feel like beta nowadays is just a way to like shield themselves from criticism. When somebody's like, this is bad, they can just be like, oh, well, it's beta, so I guess that's okay that it's bad. And you're like,
You know,
well,
that is very true.
are you letting me spend money on your game that's not finished yet? Then I deserve to complain when it's not good.
Well, you know what? Maybe I'm getting hosed. That's possible. But that's the game I've been playing this week. It's probably not that great. It's doing it for me because I get to play Final Fantasy. I mean, not Final. Like we've been talking about so much Final Fantasy. I get to play Elder Scrolls while I'm like waiting. You know, it's great.
Yeah,
like it's perfect.
And there are a lot of Final Fantasy mobile games. That's for sure.
Yeah, I've been thinking about buying one of those older Final Fantasy games and playing it on my phone now because it'll definitely have the room for it on my phone, and then it'll be like, oh, I have a game to play for like a whole year because that's how long it would take for me to play it on my phone and beat it. You know,
you can play 7. I think 7, 8, and 9. Maybe not 8. 7 and 9 are definitely on there.
I was thinking about
1 through 6 are on there.
Yeah, I was thinking about getting like 1 through 6 and going old school with it, just for fun.
Yeah, you could do that.
But what you been playing?
I'm still playing Final Fantasy 14. I'm working my way through the Shadowbringers expansion now, which has been pretty good. The story is good, but it's presented in such an MMO way where it's like big things will happen in the story and it's like really exciting. And then we're like, oh, we need to go to this new area because these exciting things just happen. And it's like really cool. And then you go to the new area and they're like, cool, before we do anything here, I'm going to need you to do a bunch of chores to show me that you're worthy or whatever reason they've come up with. And it'll just be like 3 hours of like, go kill 3 bears and bring me their butts. And it's like, it just like, the pacing is really off because, it has like such MMO qualities to it. But I watched a cutscene a couple of nights ago that like there was a bit of a twist in it. And I was like, oh man, I'm super on board again. So I'm having a good time with it. I am level 77, just hit level 77 and working my way through the main storyline quests and doing all that stuff. I'm getting really excited to get to the end because I want to do the raid that came out a couple weeks ago called Eden, which is based a lot on Final Fantasy VIII. So I am super stoked for that. But that's really it. That's all I've been playing because all of my spare gaming time I've just been putting into getting through the Shadowbringer story and trying to hit level 80.
Nice, dude. Well, I'm glad you're having a good time. It's always fun when you get a game and you get grinding on it, you know? You're going.
Yep.
It's good stuff.
Yeah, but I do want to get back to World of Final Fantasy on my Switch soon. And after that, I'm either going to play Final Fantasy 10, 2, or 12 on the Switch. I haven't really decided yet. But, yeah. Also, I really want to pick up Marvel Ultimate Alliance 3 for the Switch. I hear it's pretty decent. Not quite as good as the original Ultimate Alliance games, but like still pretty cool.
Yeah, the Ultimate Alliance games were fun for Xbox 360. I played those a lot.
Yeah, so I'm really thinking about picking that up too. That would get me off of my Final Fantasy kick. So I don't
many
know if
games.
I want to do that, or if I want to break up the Final Fantasies with some Marvel.
Or if you want to play Destiny with your friend Michael again.
I should get back into playing Destiny with my friend Mike. It's been about 2 weeks, and I definitely have like a little bit of the itch, but when I go to like, well, what can I spend time on? I'm like, I should be playing 14 so that I can progress and get to
you got to get
with
to
my
that right.
buddies.
I fully respect your decision, but I've also been very lonely. The galaxy is a lonely place when you're
Indeed.
just a single guardian and you're grinding out comp matches. Oh, it's so painful. Okay.
I'm so sorry.
No, it's trying.
Let me know when you log on to play comp matches, because maybe I'll do that with you. Play those 3.
Yeah, because
I can just kind of keep it going.
If you play 3 a week, then you get enough glory, hopefully, to move on with it. So, also, I'm doing pretty well on that sniper rifle bounty. I've been doing pretty good on that.
Oh, good.
So, okay, we got one new review. It's from RSM22. It says, "I really love this podcast. It's so awesome. It is so great. 1,000,000 out of 10 stars. It's so great. Hey, thank you, RSM22.
Thanks.
You're so great.
1,000,000 out of 10 stars.
You know what? To me, they're 1,000,000 out of 10. RSM22. That's how I feel.
You're breathtaking.
That's just be great to just compliment a stranger with "you're breathtaking." Also, we got 2 other ratings. So we actually got 3 ratings this week and 1 review. So they're the 2 anonymous people I don't know that gave us 5 stars. Thank you. Thank you for doing that.
We really appreciate it.
We really appreciate you. And you can always rate, review, and subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, or we're on Spotify, or wherever you want to listen to us. Thank you so much for doing that. If you tell your friends, that means the world to us too. We do no advertising. We just throw it out into the void. Because when we whisper to the void, sometimes things whisper back. You know? That's what we do. Sometimes. You can also email us at codexhistorypodcast@gmail.com, and you can follow Tyler at SneakerElfELPH. You can follow me, MECOLETTA. That's me Coletta on Twitter. We're both there. Thank you so much for listening. And next week we got a Final Fantasy 13. Goodbye, everyone. Goodbye, Tyler.
Goodbye, Mike.